Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Well, we concluded the section about Mr. Spider, Guru Spider, and now it's Guru Wasp, one of the 24, two of the 24 gurus that the Avadhuta Brahman learned detachment from. In the section related to the spider, we heard some very interesting descriptions of creation, the universe coming from the source and being detached because of the temporary nature of the universe, be attached to the source and so forth. In Bhagavad Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami was describing a number of things, but the form of the Lord that is perceived is in correspondence with the regard the living entity has for him. So it starts with having some regard for him, but then variegated regard. And according to that disposition of heart, the Lord shows himself. Now with the wasp, it's similar point. Where the mind goes, that's where you go. And the wasp corners an insect in a hole, and out of fear of the wasp, the insect meditates on the object of their fear. And in their next life, they become a wasp. So related, just because I thought it would be nice to share this, in that same section of Canto 3, where Lord Brahma is offering prayers to Lord Vishnu for the purpose of creation, being empowered and guided and so forth, there's a nice verse, 3:9:11. The Sanskrit reads, Yad yadya ta urugaya vibhavyanti tat tat vapu prana yase sad anugrahaya. And the translation is, you are so merciful to your devotees that you manifest yourself in the particular eternal form of transcendence in which they always think of you. And Shamsundar yesterday asked about, the eternal relationship of a living entity. So whatever that is, yet to be discovered, but it can be certainly cultivated, and we trust that the Lord will direct us from within to that form which is natural for us and so forth. The spontaneous stage of devotional service is something we can eagerly anticipate and strive for. But the principle is wherever the mind goes, if you're an insect thinking of a wasp, you'll become a wasp. And meditation based upon fear, according to what we hear in Canto 7, Chapter 1, Narada says that's even more powerful. It's more powerful than anything, fear. And because of that fear, meditating upon Krishna, Kamsa got a good result. But don't become Kamsa and do that program. But the principle is the mind is a very powerful instrument. If not controlled, it can drag us all over the universe, life after life. And if brought to the position of shelter and feeling protected and attracted and so forth towards a particular form of the Lord, or at least start with, in principle, the form, that which is the source of everything as opposed to everything, but progressively a particular form of the Lord. Just like with deity worship, Prabhupada's statement about deity worship is one should take the impression, uses that phrase, like a camera. At least the old system is the shutter opens, some light comes in, then the shutter closes. So there's some exposure, some impression on the film. I don't know how the technology with digital cameras works, but similar, some impression, a picture in your mind. And then Prabhupada's statement is throughout the day, you can think of that form. And especially those devotees who are doing deity worship, naturally they become very attached to the form of the Lord, which is super beneficial for spiritual progress. So let us go on to text 22, 11.9.22. If yatra yatra mano dehi, if out of love, hate, or fear, an embodied soul fixes his mind with intelligence and complete concentration upon a particular bodily form, he will certainly attain the form that he is meditating upon. Same point. Bhakti Siddhanta's translation. Whatever, that's that yatra yatra, whatever a living entity concentrates his mind upon, whether out of affection, so the verse is sneha, or hatred, dvesha, or fear, bhaya, he will certainly attain in his next life. The BBT purport reads, from this verse, it is not hard to understand that if one constantly meditates upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one will achieve a spiritual body just like that of the Lord. The word diya, with intelligence, indicates complete intellectual conviction in a particular understanding, and similarly the word sakalam indicates one-pointed attention with the mind, of the mind. It's like how we're supposed to chant japa, sakalam. Takes a little practice. With such complete absorption of consciousness, surely one will attain in the next life a form exactly like that upon which one was meditating. This is another example learned from the insect kingdom, as explained in the following verse. So Bhakti Siddhanta's purport. The living entity who is embodied by gross and subtle matter experiences affection, hatred, or fearfulness for the object of his attachment as dictated by his intelligence, which is under the control of the spirit of material enjoyment. Ultimately, one attains the form of the object upon which he meditates. If one can renounce the desire for material enjoyment and thus attract the attention of the unlimited affectionate Lord, while displaying anger towards those who are envious of the Lord, that's the anger part, and fear of the consequences of absorption in sense gratification, right? Those are the same three emotions. Can those emotions be used in Krishna service? And here's how. He can attain an eternal spiritual form as a servant of the Supreme Lord in his transcendental abode. And here's Bhakti Siddhanta's gloss of Vishwanath's commentary. The Avadutta Brahmana says, quote, the devotees of the Supreme Lord who are attached to meditating upon his transcendental form easily attain the same bodily features as the Lord. This is not at all wonderful. I've learned this lesson from the wasp. He hasn't been spoken about yet, but the wasp comes in the next verse. The next two verses describe the lesson to be learned from the wasp. When one's mind meditates upon a particular form without deviation, he will certainly attain that form in the future. So there's a law of nature. If we don't understand it, doesn't mean it doesn't work. It works, whether we understand it or don't understand it. And when we understand it, that's a little light goes on, intelligence. And then we can guide the mind to, depending. I mean, the modes of nature will guide you according to modes of nature, and transcendence will guide you according to that other authority, higher intelligence, buddhi, spiritual intelligence. Okay, here's Vishwanath's actual commentary. If, out of love, hate, or fear, an embodied soul fixes his mind with intelligence and complete concentration upon a particular form, he will certainly attain the form. It is not surprising that those who constantly meditate on the Lord attain forms similar to his. This, the Brahmana learned from the wasp. This is explained in two verses. When the action of the mind does not go elsewhere, the jiva attains a form similar to that of one's meditation. Okay, so that's 22. And here's Shruti Mangara's illustration of that verse. If out of love, hate, or fear, of course there's other emotions besides those, an embodied soul fixes his mind with intelligence and complete concentration on a particular bodily form, he will certainly attain the form that he is meditating upon. So we're familiar with those Bhagavad Gita illustrations. Text 23. O king, once a wasp forced a weaker insect to enter his hive and kept him trapped there. In great fear, the weak insect constantly meditated upon his captor, and without giving up his body, he gradually achieved the same state of existence as the wasp. Thus, one achieves a state of existence according to one's constant concentration. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's translation. O king, once a tiny insect was captured and kept captive in a hive of a wasp. Out of great fear, the tiny insect constantly meditated upon his captor, so that without giving up his present body, it gradually assumed the form of a wasp. Didn't have to change his body. I mean, from when didn't have to die. Thus, there is no doubt that whatever one thinks of at the time of death, he will attain that state of existence in his next life. The BBT purport reads, the following question may be raised. Since the weaker insect in this story did not physically change his body, how can it be said that he achieved the same state of existence as the wasp? Actually, by constant meditation upon a particular object, one's consciousness becomes filled with its qualities. Due to extreme fear, the small insect was absorbed in the characteristics and activities of the large wasp, and thus entered into the existence of the wasp. Due to such meditation, he actually took the body of a wasp in his next life. So it's a little different than what Bhaktisiddhanta says. Similarly, although we are conditioned souls, if we absorb our consciousness in Lord Krishna, we can become liberated even before giving up our present body if our intelligence becomes steady on the spiritual platform by understanding that Lord Krishna is everything, then we can give up unnecessary consciousness of the external body and absorb ourselves in the spiritual pastimes of Vaikuntha. Thus, even before death, one can raise oneself to the spiritual platform and enjoy life as a liberated soul. Or, if one is a stubborn fool, even then in this life, one can become just like an animal, such as a hog or dog, constantly thinking of eating and sex life. But human life is actually meant for understanding the science of consciousness and the future results of our meditation. Okay. Bhakti Siddhanta's purport is very colorful. When a cockroach sees a bright green insect, it becomes so afraid that it begins to meditate on it and thus becomes fully absorbed in its mood. Similarly, a conditioned souls can become self-realized in this very lifetime by practicing Krishna consciousness. By being established in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, they attain liberation, even in the present life. Such as a steady intelligence is the main criteria for achieving complete absorption in the object of one's meditation. I'll read it again. Steady intelligence is the main criteria for achieving complete absorption in the object of one's meditation. Being bewildered by his knowledge of the external world, the person may see the body of a liberated person as meant for his enjoyment, failing to understand his own position as a servant of the Lord. Internal perfection is distinct from external appearances. Read that again. Internal perfection is distinct from external appearances. Foolish people cannot understand this, and so they are unable to understand the intentions of perfected souls. If an ordinary person tries to understand the position of a Paramahamsa, Mahabhagavata, with the help of his mundane perception, there is no doubt he will pave his way to hell. In this regard, one should carefully consider the verses that begin Acharya Vishnau Shiladi. A person's assessment of a self-realized Vaishnava's external behavior becomes the cause of his inauspiciousness. That is why the Apichet Sudarachara verse has been presented in Bhagavad Gita 9:30. Clear? So the Bhajate Mamananyabhak personality, that's the liberated soul, the perfected soul. And that liberated soul, perfective soul, should not be judged by external things, either when the pendulum swings this way or that way. If there's some extraordinary something, one way or the other way, one should not see the external. One should see the avyavachari bhakti, the undivided devotion. Okay, so here is Bhaktisiddhanta's gloss or summary of Vishwanath's commentary. The insect attained the same bodily features as the wasp, even without giving up its present body. This indicates that when one meditates on a particular form, he will gradually come to resemble the object of his meditation. A good example of this is Dhruva Maharaj. Generally, a devotee who meditates upon the Lord gives up his material body at the time of death and then attains a spiritual form so that materialistic persons are unable to perceive the transformation. This is enacted by the internal energy of the Supreme Lord. Sometimes it appears that the spiritual body has been given up, but such pastimes are illusory. Narada Muni has explained that when he received the spiritual body of an associate of the Lord, his material body was instantly relinquished, just as a flash of lightning and its illumination occurs simultaneously. That's Bhakti Siddhanta. And here's actually what Vishwanath wrote. An insect was forced by a wasp into his nest and attained a similar form without giving up its previous body. Another version has samyatam. Sometimes the body of a person meditating is similar to the form of the Lord upon which he meditates, as in the case of Dhruva. What does that mean? Radha Krishna, we ought to explain that one. What happened with Dhruva that was it's being illustrated, a form similar to the Lord?
I was thinking he may have been liberated when the Lord touched him.
My understanding is that when he got on the Vaikuntha Vimana, his a flash of light, and he ascended in the same body. That's the meaning. He didn't change his body. He his body became fully spiritualized a little, or not little at that time, but King Dhruva.
It's also stated that at the end of the universe,
At the end of the universe,
then Dhruva actually goes to Vaikuntha planet.
yeah, okay. But that's the reference here, this Dhruva reference. A good example of this is Dhruva. He will gradually come to resemble the object of his meditation. Generally, a devotee who meditates upon the Lord gives up his material body at the time of death and then attains a spiritual form, so that materialistic people are unable to perceive. Whoops, we read that. Back to Dhruva. Sometimes the body of a person meditating is similar to the form of the Lord upon which he meditates, as in the case of Dhruva. But sometimes the meditating devotee gives up the present bodies and attains spiritual forms, though this is not seen. The Lord shows this by his Maya in order to protect the secret of Bhakti Yoga and to avoid destroying others' opinions. Sometimes it appears that a devotee even gives up a spiritual body of knowledge and bliss. A statement concerning this is made by Narada. This condition is produced by the Lord's Maya. Giving up the body is shown in this statement. This is Narada speaking, 1:6:29. Having been awarded a pure body befitting an associate of the Lord, I quit the body made of 5 material elements, and thus all acquired fruit of results of work stopped. And our final little passage is where this idea is discussed by Shivaram Swami, because there's 2 places in the Bhagavatam where the becoming transformed by meditation, Anapana Wasp, it's discussed. So he's taking those 2 references and explaining it further. And the book this is drawn from is Bhakti, Shuddha Bhakti Chintamani. This natural yearning for a spiritual body takes place as follows. The characteristic of devotees in Raga Bhakti is that the mind is naturally drawn to the Brajbasis. Absorption in hearing and chanting about Braja leaves impressions of the Brajbasis' moods and characteristics in the devotees' minds. As these impressions become pervasive, devotees begin to identify with the Brajavasis. This identification leads to the strong ambition to become a Brajavasi, an ambition which naturally includes the desire to have a suitable form. In this way, devotees become absorbed in yearning for a spiritual body. Paragraph. Srimad Bhagavatam twice uses the same example, that of a grassworm and the wasp, to explain this transformation of consciousness. First, Narada Muni recounts it to Yudhisthira Maharaj. That's 7th canto, chapter 1. And then the Avadhuta Brahmana relates it to Maharaj Yadu, the verse that we're discussing. Because of the importance of this concept, both references are cited here. Narada Muni says, quote, a grassworm confined in a hole of a wall by a bee always thinks of the bee in fear and enmity and later becomes a bee simply because of such remembrance. Similarly, if the conditioned souls somehow or other think of Krishna, who is Satchitananda Vigraha, they will become free from all their sins, whether thinking of him as their worshipable Lord or an enemy. Because of constantly thinking of him, they will regain their spiritual bodies. That's references 7:1, 28, 29. And here's this morning's verse. The Avadhuta Brahmana says, O king, once a wasp forced a weaker insect to enter his hive and kept him trapped there in great fear. The weak insect constantly meditated upon his captor. Without giving up his body, he gradually achieved the same state of existence as the wasp. Thus, one achieves a state of existence according to one's constant concentration. Paragraph. The purport of these verses is that by constant meditation on a particular object, one's consciousness becomes filled with its qualities. A smaller insect, absorbed by fear in the qualities and movements of the larger one, assumed all the characteristics on which it had meditated, even while in its small insect body. Of course, at death, this small insect assumed the form of the larger wasp. In the same way, devotees drawn to constant thoughts of the inhabitants of Vrindavan assume a particular body in the mind even before they realize their form from the spiritual platform. Shyam Sundar, you were asking. This is addressing. Srila Prabhupada summarizes this process from Easy Journey to Other Planets, Chapter 1. The gradual evolutionary progress of the material body depends on psychological changes within the mind. The change of the bodily construction of a worm into that of a butterfly, and in modern medical science, the conversion of a man's body into that of a woman, or vice versa, are more or less dependent on psychological changes. Paragraph. It is extremely important to note, however, that this mental impression is not the siddhadeya, semicolon. It is merely a vehicle by which devotees mentally cultivate pure devotional service, just as the gross material body is a vehicle through which devotees physically cultivate service, as to identify the body made of five senses is illusion, so to identify with the subtle body made of mind, intelligence, and false ego is illusion. Then again, this verse that I referred to at the beginning, 3:9:11, where Brahma is saying to Krishna, you are so merciful to your devotees that you manifest yourself in the particular eternal form of transcendence in which they always think of you. That's, the corollary to our body changes and he shows the form according to our meditation upon him. There's a little illustration for 23, which we just read. Here's the graphic. It's nice. O king, once a wasp forced a weaker insect to enter the hive and kept him trapped there. In great fear, the weak insect constantly meditated upon his captor, and without giving up his body, he gradually achieved the same state of existence as the wasp. Thus, one achieves a state of existence according to one's constant concentration. We don't see the insect, but we see the bee. Looks like a bee, not a wasp, but in any case. The principle is It's easy to connect these two, the insect and the cultivation of bhakti. Now, it is very important. It's not unimportant. It's very important that we have progressively an idea, an understanding through descending knowledge of the Lord's nature, his loving dealings and his form, his qualities. That's Bhagavad Gita. And it's such an essential part of our process. It's the very beginning, the middle, and the end. That is to say, Shravanam is the beginning, and all the other processes of bhakti that follow rest upon it. And that's the first um, way in which the Lord appears. There's one recorded lecture, Prabhupada installing deities, if I recall correctly. It was in Los Angeles, and Prabhupada was saying that by worshiping the deity very pleasingly and favorably and so forth, by your giving yourself to the deity in service, one day the deity will speak to you and he will say, I am like this. And again, it's through sound. The beginning, the middle, and the end is that sound vibration. The sound is not different than the person. And that's how we're acquainted with the person, because we don't have the eyes to see, but the way to see is through the hearing process in a qualitative and faithful way. And how well we apply ourselves to that hearing process will determine how much cleansed we become and everything else, the realizations that we achieve, the experiences that we have, the detachment that we can undergo, and attachment to the Lord. The process is simple. Where is the difficulty? When Shruti Kirti titled his book, Where's the Difficulty, I started paying more attention to how often Prabhupada would say it. And Prabhupada often would say, what is the difficulty? What is the difficulty? The difficulty is our attachment to illusion. It's not the illusion per se, it's our attachment to it. I mean, Maya is strong, but we're attached. This whole idea of, I find it, just a comment, I find it important and fascinating that the beginning of this Uddhava Gita, that's how exalted is Uddhava. He's not giving the Uddhava Gita lesson to the Brijbasi, he's giving it to the one who's closest to the Brijbasis outside of Vrindavan, is Uddhava, most elevated person outside of Vrindavan. And it starts with all this knowledge and detachment business. It says something. We'll say it this way. How many have had the experience, either personally or in your relationship with others who are involved in the bhakti process for some period of time, however many years, some number of years? Shri Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. Who express in different language, I don't feel I'm making substantial progress, in different ways. I've been chanting for X time, and I still don't have an attraction for chanting or some other way of saying the same thing. I'm not making much progress. To be honest with myself, I look inside and I'm not really making much. I don't have a taste, etc., etc. The other, in the beginning I had such enthusiasm, and now that enthusiasm has waned. What happened? There's so many ways of saying. There are different ways of responding: offense, attachment, slackening, and submission. What's the cure? It's the same as the process itself. If the process doesn't change, the medicine doesn't change, the disease continues. We have to apply ourselves very carefully, to well, let's say these two things: effort and mercy. Apply ourselves with very, very careful effort in the hearing process. That's not just information gathering, but cleansing and letting go of that which needs to be cleansed and taking shelter. If that spirit of bhakti can carry us to the further advanced stages. So this is one of those verses that's teaching us that your mind's going to go somewhere, and sound vibration has a lot to do with where the mind goes. And so hear the sound vibration, but hear in a concentrated way, where your intelligence is active. It's not just the mouth is making some sound, but your mind and intelligence are active. And so you can't be lazy. You have to be. Bhakti is not for laziness. And progress will follow. Letting go and taking shelter will follow. And that's the topic for tomorrow. What does it mean to take shelter? That's our topic tomorrow. Okay, so let's see if there's some discussion. Important and relevant topic for us. Nothing? Let's go online, see if there's something online. No? You have something? Go ahead.
Maharaj, I was just appreciating how it this metaphor of the wasp and the insect actually changing his body. It actually is such a great way to explain this process to us, and it makes it very very easy to understand and just see how that it's not necessarily the physical gross body changes first, but that just by fixing your mind on something, that subtle body changes and you get that mentality.
Exactly.
And then the gross body change follows that after in the next.
And that nice example from Easy Journey to Other Planets was also helpful. It's just elaboration. Prabhupada's words elaborating on the process, how transmigration works. It's not only karma. It's certainly not only karma. It's guna, and what the mind is attached to is guna influenced, not karma influenced. Yes.
I did have a question also. When it was talking about how devotees will sometimes they will get a spiritual body even in this life, while others they won't get a spiritual body until after this life and they're returning to the spiritual world. Is there some type of rule when that happens or when it doesn't, or is this just exalted personalities who get their spiritual body in this life?
Well, two answers. It's Krishna's rule, and the other answer is absorption. And there's degrees of absorption, of course, but when there's absorption, it's still up to Krishna But the criterion is absorption. The mind, one mana. Mayi chananya yogena. Absorption. Okay, something online?
Question from Uttama Bhakta Prabhu. When one feels I am not making progress, is it primarily because I have taken my eyes off the why aspect of devotional service and possibly the how aspect?
Well, Uttam Bhakta, there are many ways to look at that question. And one of the ways to look at that question, you've stated, and there's other ways that are also valid, legitimate, important ways to look at the same question. It's not one bucket only. But your answer is correct. That's one of the many correct ones.
Question from Atulya Devidasi. Maharaj, the evaluation of one's bhakti itself needs purity, seeing beyond one's filters and having a detached look at oneself. How may I get a clear idea of where I stand in my journey to Krishna?
You're going to have to be patient. Because there's no substitute for purity. So according to purity, you'll get what you get. And you keep striving further. With more purity, you'll have a better picture.
Question from Snehavali Devidasi. On one of the Prabhu's comments, in case of insects, it's the physical body which is changing. But in case of human species...
In case of which?
Human species.
Human species.
It's the subtle body which changes. Is this the correct understanding? Insects are not changing the subtle body. I think that's what the verse says.
That's not what I've understood. The understanding is that the insect that's captured by the wasp or the bee, because there's two examples, their mind, they have a mind. Their mind is absorbed in the object of their captor, and their subtle body changes by that absorption in their captor, and the form of their captor and everything. So their subtle body changes. It's not exclusive to humans. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.